you.
So it's C, it's C, I would say C.
All right, other questions?
Yeah. In page 143.
Okay, 143. Wait.
What page? 143.
143.
Number 2.
Okay.
The correct answer is D. Total cost panel is something for sure as well, but I was the last one that says it.
Wait a minute, what? It says the decision as to whether, what's that, next two words?
Probable cause.
Now, who do you think would figure out if there was probable cause?
Well, of course,
The probable cause panel.
Yeah, but it says afterwards, or the department, if there is no panel, so that thing lost me.
So which
what
answer
happens
did
if-
you pick?
The wrong one. A, commission.
Hmm?
I picked A, commission. I mean, there are members of the commission that are in the panel that.
It's not the commission. The commission would be everybody.
Yeah, you're right. Like members of the commission are 2 members on the
Right.
on the cost panel. I think why the department if there is no panel? I mean, it didn't say in the book, it did say, that's why I got lost.
And they sent him home, I don't understand why. Because
Uh,
they were orthopedic doctors today.
If the probable cause members were not available, and they needed to, they got investigations coming in and they need to take care of them, then the department will step in and do the probable cause. As a matter of fact, if the department doesn't agree with the probable cause decision, they can step in.
I was starting to look at it.
All right, other questions? Please make sure you sign the attendance. And do me a favor, please print in English, not whatever chicken scratch or whatever it is. I'm usually able to figure out most of them.
Mr. Bell,
Yes, ma'am.
you know, questions, the
What page?
question, unit 5, number 1 and 11,
Give me a page.
page 113.
113,
Question number 1.
okay, question number 1. It says here, John Anderson is a licensed real estate sales associate. Under which name may he register and be licensed?
A.
See,
He's an
No.
associate, he can't have a company.
Right.
So only A permits.
I'll give it to her.
Under which name? Complete Real Estate Sales Services sounds like the name of the company. He can't operate under the name of the company. John Anderson Brokerage,
it's not.
we can't do that.
You can't do a brokerage. Oh, and partners.
And John Smith LLC, you can. You can function under an LLC, provided that you use your name. You can't do Wild Investments LLC. I'd have to do K. Dale Doyle, comma, LLC. So the only reason that you would do that as a sales associate is to beat Uncle Sam out of money.
So it's a pass-through.
So you can do C,
Huh?
can you go with C?
Yeah.
Oh,
And how does that relate to, if you were here, to the brokerage firm?
You're allowed to function under a LLC name as long as it's your name. So whatever name you have registered in Tallahassee, you can convert it into an LLC. It says right in the rules.
So that means you can.
So that means that Ben can then pay you as an LLC.
And there are tax benefits for that.
Yes.
So do a lot of people do that?
No,
How come?
because they don't know they're in business. See, I've told you already, you need to sit down with your accountant, CPA, whoever it is that does your taxes, and you need to figure out, once I got that license, how do I want to operate? I mean, I've got the limits of the law, but I also have got to think about it from a business perspective. You know, what type of things can you deduct? Where are the dangerous deductions? You have to be careful what you deduct. Can't prove it.
Okay, so.
That means you gotta get in the habit of watching your mileage, for example.
So, Mr. Dell,
Receipts for everything that you purchase for your business.
It can be any LLC.
No, it has to be your name.
Your name.
In other words, if I wanted to do an LLC as a sales associate or a broker associate, I would have to do it as K. Dale Doyle, LLC. I couldn't be Bluebird Realty LLC,
No.
because that's a company. I'd have to be an active broker in order to do that.
okay, number 11, page 114.
Same thing.
114. Next page. Number 11.
Please, yes.
It says, one difference between a general and limited partner is that only the general partnership may be registered as a real estate broker. Well, that's a lie. Either one of them can. The second one, limited partners must make a cash or property investment.
No, it must not.
Must make. Don't know that they must.
Yeah, it must.
So we'll hold off on that one. While both have general partners, there must be 2 or more general partners in a limited partnership.
No,
it's one, the only one.
Only one. That's definitely wrong. Limited partners must be licensed as either active or inactive sales associates.
no,
No, they don't have to be licensed as anything.
no.
So the answer is B, I had A. How come it's B?
How come it's B? Because limited partnerships also have to be registered as a broker. This is telling you only general partnership does. But limited partner, see, what got me was the must.
Yeah,
They're not required to make any investment
no.
by law. They may be by agreement. But I could be a limited partner and not put anything in the limited partnership. That probably does, you know, sweat equity.
So the answer is B, even if you have the must?
Yeah. Because A is absolutely wrong.
Read the question again so I can hear it.
What page is the question, Dale? On this one?
It's
114.
114, number 11.
One difference between a general and limited partnership. They want to know the difference between a general partnership and a limited partnership. Only a general partnership may be registered as a real estate broker. The second one, limited partner must make a cash or property investment. While both general partners, there must be 1 or more general partners. No, there has to be 1 or more, not 2 or more. There has to be 2 partners. One of them has to be general, one of them has to be limited.
Okay. We can,
That is a tricky one.
Now, you have to slow down in questions like this, because you have to make sure you read them carefully.
So which one is your correct?
All right, anybody else?
Yes, B.
Must make an investment.
Everything, but the most is the one that I.
Where's signage, you guys? Yep. Anybody over here to design? Add a couple more outside. Okay. There's something that I need you to be aware of. It's not a very good way to start a class. Nellie Ronberg, who's one of our fellow students' husband, was killed over the weekend when he was out riding his bicycle. That's what we were discussing. So I want to make sure that you're.
And they just moved 3 months ago from New
Yes.
York.
Yep, to start a new life.
Yeah.
You know,
3 months ago they moved
you
here.
gotta kiss the ground every day. Thank God that,
Is she a broker
you still can stand
or?
up.
She was in our class,
Yeah.
the curly hair.
Where did she sit?
She was always sitting over here with Jamie. They just.
Oh my God, she just told me she just moved down here.
She did. Oh my goodness. I didn't know
No,
that was
I
her.
don't. So I will keep you abreast of whatever's happening.
Oh my God.
It's okay. Like I said, not a great way to have to start a class, but.
His service is on Thursday at noon. I'm gonna be going to, she has 2 young girls, with her husband. And, if anybody wants to, bring money on Wednesday, I was thinking, just getting them like a gift card or something to be able to like pick up food and so they don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So I'll bring a card and if anybody wants to contribute, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. 2 years ago.
Okay, deep breath. Okay, let's finish up chapter 7, please. We are, I think the last place you should have a star was on 156.
No, we have a.
That's why I asked.
154 was
On
the last.
156, in that paragraph where it talks about broker,
Property management.
we had one sentence I had you highlight.
Yes.
To the
That is
bottom.
the story.
I just have one point on test. Are you sorry?
I think from now on, what I'm gonna do is, when I buy the books, I'm gonna have them input a big star on the front of the book.
That's helpful.
I think that'll cut down on the stress of, what page? What do you say?
I like it better when you tell me, because I wouldn't read this book, period.
Whatever. All right, on 157 at the bottom of the page. When you look at the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, one of the things that it does is it talks about the responsibilities of the landlord and the responsibility of the tenant. And it also talks about what rights a tenant has and what rights the landlord has. The purpose of the Landlord and Tenant Act is to create an equitable relationship between the landlord and tenant. It is absolutely critical that when you're working with a lease, that you make sure that your customer has a copy of that Landlord and Tenant Act. Because on the leases that we use, it specifically states in 5 different places that there is a copy of the Landlord and Tenant Act attached to the lease. Now, the other agent doesn't want to do it, I could care less, unless they're another SIRE agent. But you always want to make sure that they get a copy. The best way to do that using the app files is you send it as a signature request, actually initial request. And when they get it, they will be able to electronically initial the 11 pages of the act, which will then immediately give into their email, will give them a copy of the one they've initialed, and one comes back to us. And that way, they have a copy, and we have proof that we sent it to them. By doing that, as soon as you have a signed lease and that tenant moves in, your job is done. They have a problem, they need to see their attorney or read the law. Because anything you would do at that point would be giving them advice. And I don't think anybody in here have a shingle hanging out somewhere. I don't think so. So you have to be very careful, because you know a lot of things that you have to keep your mouth shut about. It's important that you know them. It's also important that you don't interpret them for the public. It's not your job. And this is a perfect example, yes.
So the landlord's obligation, all these are mandatory?
I haven't got to that yet. You're always 2 steps ahead of me there. And the answer is yes. Let me show you what she's talking about. On page 157, starting with line 1, which is about 2/3 of the way down the page, where it says landlord's obligation to maintain premise. What's the second word? Obligation. That answers her question right there. And then bracket down to the bottom of the page. No star. But you see the 3 bullets. 3, excuse me. Can't count 4. By the way, the landlord doesn't have to pay for this stuff. They can have the tenant pay for it. And normally the way that's done is by building it into what you charge the rent.
So you see,
I said that the landlord doesn't have to pay for those services. They have to provide them. The tenant
Has to pay for them.
has to pay for them. Now, most cases, it's not gonna be a separate bill. And they're gonna factor it into the rent.
If there's a hurricane, is it the tenant's job to put the shutters up, or is it the landlord's job?
What should we say?
I don't know, I'm just asking, like, what is the
Well,
most?
actually, I gave you the answer to your question.
Oh, okay, so it's like negotiable.
Can apartment communities tell you not to put up shutters during a hurricane time?
It
'Cause I
depends,
know-
it depends on local ordinance.
But isn't that dangerous?
There's no law that says you have to put up shutters.
I'll go outside, take a tree branch, stick it through my TV, and stick it through my window, and I'll leave TV.
If you have renter's insurance.
They didn't take it through the windows, window shutters.
Well, they definitely don't put up windows.
Like three little pigs.
Here's another question. So I know I shouldn't start these kind of questions with this group.
You say that about every group.
And obviously I never learned my lesson, do I?
It's just human nature.
Question. Do they have to provide air conditioning?
Yes.
Yes.
Show me where it says that.
When it says hot, but do they do?
Show me in the book where it says that. I don't want to hear your damn opinion.
In the state, I thought that in the state of Florida.
You did what?
In the state of Florida.
No. You used the word you're not allowed to use again.
You can't think.
You thought.
It said heat plus running water.
It's
Yeah.
Need heat for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you don't got AC, but turn it up.
Well, remember that part of Florida gets cold.
Yeah. They're like, what do you mean you need heat? You turn the heat up, and then when it cools down, feel like AC's in the house.
Now, but if they have air conditioning, it must be maintained in working condition.
Right.
So my question was, do they have to provide air conditioning?
No.
The answer is no. But if the unit comes with air conditioning, they must maintain it.
Who's that, the landlord?
Landlord. The only thing you would have to do is change filters. You're supposed to do that every 30 days. Everybody rents knows this. Whether you do it or not is another story. Come and read your lease, you might find it and be an interesting document. Huh?
Those air filters get expensive.
Yeah.
For like
$3, yeah.
For the cheap.
No, you can find them for cheap.
That reminds me, I've got
It's like a phone bill. I gotta take mine out too.
Line 10, 11, 12, 13. Says the landlord is allowed to charge tenants for services, provided the services are included in the rental agreement. If dwelling unit is a single-family home or duplex, the landlord is required to install working smoke detectors before the beginning of the lease. And you, as the tenant, would be responsible for replacing the batteries.
That's a lot of strength to that.
Yeah.
Like, at that point, you might as well start your own restaurant.
And you have to maintain it. On the top of page 158, you've got a section there that says tenant obligation. So is there other reasons why it could be evicted other than paying my rent or not paying my rent? Say yes or no.
Yes.
So I guess, working on my motorcycle in the middle of a living room on the carpet would probably be a no-no.
It would be pretty cool.
Clean and sanitary.
Yeah, I've heard some stories. My favorite one was my wife's grandparents in New York City, way back when. they came home from work one day and there was some furniture, laying out on the sidewalk. And Grandma, or Nana, said, that looks like our furniture. They got up to their apartment and the key, the locks had been changed. The landlord, was able to get $50 or more a month from another tenant, so he moved them out. At that point in time in New York, there was no laws to govern them.
Where was it in
Yeah, my
Huh?
my coat for you.
Where in New York? Where in New York?
Brooklyn, maybe?
Oh, in Brooklyn.
Oh, that's
That's where
why.
I come from.
No offense.
That's where I'm from. That village?
But understand this, we're talking the 20s and 30s. We're not talking last week.
You could have been talking next week.
That I don't know. I grew up in Virginia. I have no idea. That's way geographically in another world.
New York in the 20s? I'd have been out.
Al Capone.
Oh, no, that's Chicago.
I know Chicago.
Yeah. I'd have been there.
Yeah, but see, where I grew up, it was called moonshiners.
Oh, yeah. You
And
guys
if you didn't have a pickup truck with a gun rack, you weren't cool. I taught at a school, elementary school, when I first got out of college in Virginia. There was actually 3 of them. The phys ed teacher for 3 different schools. And one of them was in a place called Goshen Pass, which is an opening in the mountains between Virginia and West Virginia. And the year before I got there, there was a major fight on one of the buses between the kids. Would you like to know the last names? Hatfield and McCoy. So this was early 70s. So the war was still going on. So it was a beautiful place. Goshen Pass was a river that goes through it. In the middle of the summer, the water's about 25 degrees.
You remember just walk outside and get a deer, huh?
No, I might get a pig or a hog. Well, actually, I just go out on the back porch, and I got a freezer
And they're just
full
there.
of pork and beef. And then we had, the old metal milk cans? Had a milk out. And I remember in the winter, I would go out with my bowl of cereal, scrape the cream off the top of the milk.
Right to the
It's
cows.
amazing, I don't have cholesterol.
All those vitamins.
That's probiotics for sure.
Yeah.
That's not good.
The only time it wasn't good is when the kids, the milk cow would get in the wild oats out in the field. You ever drank milk that tasted like onions? My father loved it. I remember having to drink fast and plan and throw it up. All right, back to this. When you look at these things, it's pretty obvious. You're occupying something that belongs to somewhere else, and you have the obligation to take care of it. Also, too, let's say that you realize that the faucet is leaking. You have an obligation not to fix it, but to inform the landlord or property manager, whatever the case may be, to take care of that. The next one category talks about landlord's access to the premises. Now, landlords can't just walk into the unit anytime they feel like it. They have to give you notice. The minimum notice, unless it's an emergency, is 12 hours.
Well, what would be when there's emergency or the roof?
Best example of emergency is hot water heaters, especially if there's 4 or 5 story condos. Because if the 4th floor one goes,
I love that.
the 3rd floor, it get it real bad. 2nd floor, not so bad. And the bottom floor might get lucky. And might not. So, another thing would be to provide services. A good example of services would be pest control.
That's,
And that's important, because if I'm living in an apartment complex or a condominium, and the ones on either side of me aren't spraying,
Yeah.
all mine are gonna do what?
Spread the-
Run over there and then run back.
you know what's funny? My neighbor bought a bunch of Venus flytraps. Because in our backyard, we have a lake back there and there's so many mosquitoes. Those little things are really cool. They're just like closing all night. But he has like thousands of them, and he planted them all in his yard.
Yep,
They're pretty cool.
they are. Now, the 12-hour thing is in the paragraph, that's lines 15 through 21 on 158. No, I'm just pointing it out.
15 through 20.
Now, we're coming to the end of the lease. The Landlord and Tenant Act says the landlord can't require the tenant to give more than a 60-day notice. I may not be there. If, as the landlord, you have no intention of making a claim on the security deposit, you have 15 days from the end of the lease to send them a check. If you intend to make a claim on all or part of the security deposit, you have 30 days to put the tenant on notice. If I'm not mistaken, the tenant has 15 days to respond. That makes sense. If you're not gonna lay a claim on it, just give the money back. You don't need extra time. So to me, those two numbers used to be reversed, which makes no sense.
Well,
To me, if you're gonna make a claim, that may take longer, because you gotta put it together and get it to them and everything. Whereas if you're just gonna send them a check back, I don't have anything to do.
You just get your check.
why wouldn't you wait or claim your deposit back? Why?
Who's you? Landlord or tenant? When you say you, who's you?
Yeah, I mean.
The landlord or the tenant?
The tenant.
Okay, now ask the question again. See, it's important
Why
because if you're asking it from the point of view of the landlord, it's gonna be a different answer
Yeah.
than from the point of view of the tenant.
I will always notify with 30 days because I wanna get my deposit back.
If I wanna get my deposit back, I wanna get it back fast. I don't wanna wait 30 days.
So you will do it in 15 days?
No, I don't control that. The law does. The law says the landlord has 15 days to return my security deposit if they're not gonna lay a claim. If they're gonna lay a claim, the law is giving them 30 days to send you the claim.
So basically, they're not gonna give you the deposit,
Until they see
they're
it.
gonna wait the 30 days.
No,
If there's no damages, it should be returned within 15 days, is what he's saying.
no. Well, yeah, when you say damages, yeah, then he's not gonna lay a claim on it.
Yeah.
Because it may not be damages. They may say, look, you dirtied the carpet, I'm gonna have to have the carpet cleaned. That's gonna cost me $200 or $300. I'm deducting that from your security deposit. That's why you advise your tenant to do what?
Clean everything.
Everybody, stop talking. You want to advise your client, the customer, if they are the tenant, to do what? Take pictures when?
When you move in.
When you move in and when you move out.
Every corner.
And you know what? I'm looking for things that could be questionable as far as condition, that it's more than normal wear and tear, because it was like that when I moved in. But the landlord sees a slick way of doing what? getting reimbursed for something that wasn't my fault. And you'll see, once you start, you'll see the residential leases that we normally use, because there's only certain ones we can use. A lot of this stuff is spelled out. Actually, when you look at the lease and you look at the Landlord and Tenant Act, there are statements in the lease that were basically, they just pulled them out of the Landlord and Tenant Act and stuck it in the lease. So you really don't have the whole package if you don't have the lease and the Landlord and Tenant Act. And just for identification purposes, there are two parts to the Landlord and Tenant Act. The first, part one, is non-residential. Part two, which is what we study, is residential. So there is, because it says in the book, Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. It doesn't say commercial. But, so you know there is one. There's two parts to the act. Part one is commercial, part two is residential.
So, quick question.
Yeah.
If you disagree with your landlord,
Mm-hmm.
like I had a landlord that told me I had to paint, that's why she was keeping my receipt, my down payment and
Why'd you have to pay?
it was $3,000. I said, well, I'll see you in court, and she gave me the money. But,
Tried to squeeze it out of you.
I mean, I'm like, you wanted me to paint? Like, I've never heard of that.
Before
That
you
wasn't
left.
on the lease, that I had to paint after I left.
If you
Was it a
saw,
house
if
or
you
But like,
saw-
if you disagree with them, what are you supposed to do if they're keeping your money?
Find them in court.
Line 35.
Reading stuff, or you just know like this stuff, like,
Let's see, I've been doing it since 1978.
alright.
No, I don't remember everything. You'll notice I'm constantly doing what? I've just learned how to get from here to there without you realizing it. That was my biggest fear when I first started, because I don't, you know me, I like running around the room. And I get over here in the corner and realize what? I don't remember what I'm supposed to say next. So how do I get from there to here without everybody realizing that I don't have a clue?
You gotta find a piece, man.
Yeah. Tell my wife that. She said, well, shuffle that. And you'll notice at the bottom of page 158, they make reference to the Landlord and Tenant Act, but it says residential Landlord and Tenant Act.
Now, do we have to start?
No. I'm sorry, yes. The star is the two bullets of the 15 days and the 30 days, right in the middle of 158. 22 through 28. 158. Lines 22 through 28.
With the start?
Yeah, you can do
I
it
like that.
You'll also notice in the gray box at the top, they kind of lay it out a little bit, so it might be helpful. The next two sections talk about termination of the rental agreement by the tenant or by the landlord. If the landlord was not complying with the terms of the lease, the tenant can put the landlord on notice, just like the landlord can put the tenant on notice.
But that's just a written notice, right?
Yeah. And if you read the Landlord Tenant Act, it tells you how to word it. And when you go to, as a landlord, to make a demand on the deposit, they have a phrase built into the Landlord Tenant Act that they expect you to use in your notification to the tenant that you want all or part of that money. That's why you want to encourage your landlords and your tenants to read that thing. Because it's going to be the basis of what they can or can't do, or what they're responsible for or not responsible for. not gonna sit there and read it to them, this is not their grade. But I do wanna emphasize to them, it's important that they do. How do I do that? Send them an email. Out of the ad file. Reminding them that it would be to their benefit to make sure they're familiar with the Landlord-Tenant Act, because it shows your obligations and the landlord's obligations and rights. So, we'll talk about the typical reason an eviction happens, which is the tenant not paying rent. But let's stay here for a little bit. As the tenant, it is the middle of summer. Temperature has been around 100 every day. Humidity's been somewhere around 400. And guess what happens?
The AC is somewhere.
The AC stops working. Now, what can happen, depending on the situation, especially if you have young kids or elderly people living with you, that you can go to a hotel or motel, probably not the Ritz-Carlton.
Why not?
But the point being is, if it gets to the point where it could endanger your health because of the conditions being created by the lack of air conditioning, and again, the air conditioning was part of the deal on the lease, you're able to, as a tenant, to go to someplace, and normally what will happen is they'll just adjust the rent until you're reimbursed.
Someplace, where is someplace?
Hmm?
Where is someplace? You can-
Hotel, motel? You just need to be reasonable in choosing them. Like I said, you can't go to the Boca Hotel, $800 a night.
After landlord expenses?
Yes.
What happens if you rent from an?
He doesn't pay for it, he'll adjust the rent until
So take the days.
they're reimbursed. But you can't just, the air conditioner went out, I'm going to the Ritz-Carlton.
Well, it depends what you're renting. Because if I'm paying 20 grand a month for a mansion, best believe I'm going to Ritz-Carlton.
This is true. Well, if you're paying $20,000 a month, that air conditioner will be fixed before the end of the day.
One question, if you are renting from an individual, like nobody, it's not a
Yeah.
complex, it's just a
Yeah,
person.
like a
And,
condo.
and that person doesn't want to pay anything, then you will have to go through a legal.
What do you mean, what doesn't want to pay?
If I said, okay, I'm gonna go to a hotel, and
Uh-huh.
he said, oh, no, I wanna pay you, so then we're gonna go in a dispute and then litigation, and then it's
Well,
gonna.
he can say whatever he wants to, I'm gonna deduct it from the rent.
Okay.
Because I had that about 3 or 4 years ago, so I called up an attorney friend, who I know deals a lot with evictions and stuff. And, she said, they can't go running off just because the air went out. But, if it's off an unreasonable amount of time,
What happens if the damage is higher than the rent that you have to pay?
then it's offset against next month.
So it's the landlord's responsibility either way.
Because there is a segment in the lease, they talk about major and minor repairs. And they say anything, let's use $100 as an example. Anything that's $100 or less that has to be fixed, like the dishwasher stops working. They come out, it's a switch, they charge you $75. Tenant would pay for that. So they come out and say, I can't fix this thing again. This thing's dead. Now we're talking $300 for a new one. That would fall on the landlord. Because typically that dollar break point is $100 to $150. And it's right in the lease. Also in the lease, it checks off the things that the landlord has to maintain, and what the tenant has to maintain. Yes,
Can the lease be altered
by who?
by the landlord?
Yeah, as long as the tenant signs and agrees to it. Yeah, you can't change the rules going down the road. Well, you can, there's one statement on there, if you don't check the right box, they would have the right to change the rules as they go down the road.
Well, I wanna know what box that
But that would require the ability to read. And we know that's a problem.
is. I don't know.
Now, what we were just talking about is on 159 and on 160. What I'd like to take a look at next is the gray box on 160.
Not sure.
The gray box ties to the 6 steps at the bottom, on the rest of the page for eviction requirements. Take a second, read through that, and look at it. Yeah, and look below. What's the first thing that happens if I don't pay my rent? No.
No, you receive a notification.
Notify the tenant, right?
Notice.
3-day notice.
Excluding
I've
weekends.
had people in a class that worked in these big apartment complexes. And they said it was fun to watch them. They had, at the door of the office, as one was telling me, they had a slit in it, like a mail slit, and a box. And they said on that, the night of the 3rd day, that box would fill up. They knew when they came in on day 4, that box would be full. Because everybody, would wait till the last second
Right.
to put the rent in. But let's assume that the rent doesn't show up. What happens next?
Then is, the landlord
Filing.
notifies files a claim, a legal action
Legal action.
to evict. So they get in agreement and they send a notification that they have, that the tenant has to answer in 5 days.
So can we put this in a Reader's Digest version? My Like a mini?
3-day eviction notice or.
All right, 3-day eviction, I got 3-day notice to pay. I don't pay, what happens?
And 5 days.
You get.
They go to court, right?
Yeah.
Get, looking for what?
Served by, sheriff.
If the court agrees,
They send you a letter.
then the court does what?
Notify them, send a letter.
Notifies the tenant.
Right.
5 days.
And the tenant has 5 days to respond, which means that could be the second trip to court.
Yeah.
Because if the tenant shows up, tenant might win.
Yep.
Well,
And it's
I live in a
all-
house.
Oh, I have a-
So,
I would just like you to keep your
I have a
mouth.
question.
Yes,
Is there a time limit that if they missed 1 month's rent, 2 months' rent before this action begins, or is it something that's immediate?
it depends on what the lease says.
Most leases, or at least what I've seen, it gives you a grace period. So either if you
How
don't
long?
pay by the 16th,
Right.
then they start charging you extra money. Doesn't say that you're gonna be evicted.
Right. Well, if they're gonna evict you, they're gonna give you 3 days notice. Whether that 3 days notice is the first month you're late or the 10th month you're late, they still gotta give them 3 days notice. To basically say I'm coming after you. So the court issues a notice. Now, somebody has to deliver that. Sheriff. Or there are companies who work on behalf of the courts, deliver those kind of notices. Same kind of thing if you're getting a foreclosure notice.
No, but what the sheriff sends is the eviction.
No,
When the
no,
employee says he
not at this point. Because the tenant has the right now to what? To respond.
respond.
You can't just kick me out.
Exactly, and then the sheriff.
Now, we're back in court again. Let's assume that the judge agrees with the landlord. What happens next?
Then the sheriff takes to the tenant that they
Then
have.
they issue what?
The eviction letter.
Eviction notice, which is now delivered.
And it's
What if nobody's there?
Leave it at the door.
Leave it at the door. That's why they typically have 2 people. And I have a feeling in today's world, they take pictures, but just a wild guess.
And carry guns.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I have a couple friends who had that kind of job, but yeah, you're right.
Oh, excuse me, so who would drop off the notice? The sheriff?
Either the sheriff or there are companies out there that work with the courthouse, the courts, to deliver.
So is that cost a lot for apply this process?
I'm sorry?
Is that cost a lot for the landlord to apply this process?
It could, because you may wind up having to have legal assistance.
If you do it all yourself.
We have properties.
You can charge it.
I want you to restore it. How much notice does the tenant get to get out?
24 hours.
24 hours. What happens after 24 hours? Now, here's something that you need to make sure as a tenant, you understand this. You don't touch that tenant. You don't threaten that tenant. Huh? No. I'm talking about as a landlord. You do not want to hit, touch, or threaten your tenant. Because he can wind up owning your unit.
So wait,
Yes.
in the state of Florida, they have that law, self-defense law, where if somebody walks on your property and you feel threatened, you can take them out. So if
Not walks on your property.
You know
That is not immediate danger.
But if the landlord comes inside like your house because he has a key and you're just sitting there.
Well, wait a minute. It's not it's his house. It's not yours anymore. You are in default.
No, I'm not saying I'm the landlord. I'm
Oh,
saying
you're the landlord.
I'm the tenant.
You're
And
the
landlord
tenant?
comes up, yeah.
Okay, and you're now illegally on my property.
No, but.
Yes, you are now illegally on my property, because you had a lease that you didn't live up to, the courts have agreed with me, you got a 24-hour notice, you're trespassing. Get the hell off my property.
This is before I even got kicked out.
So
what's that got to do with our
If he
discussion?
comes over there and he's acting up like a riot, am I allowed to defend myself as if it's my property? Like if I'm in fear of my life? What happens to that?
You're in fear of your life.
Yeah, like if he comes up to my house with a Glock and I got my nephew on the couch and I take him out. Whose house, like would you have
You take him out, he was still outside, you better drag him in.
No, yeah. I'll drag him, I'll make it all look good, don't worry about that. I'm just trying to figure it out.
Like, hey!
There's not scenario, like where you go.
But let me tell you the first thing you need to do. You need to get yourself find a good law firm. One attorney isn't going to be enough. A attorney will not be enough. You're going to need quite a few specialists so far.
I like the whole idea. You get off outside.
I'm gonna call the Kardashians. He got OJ out.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
I'm like, yo, Kim, I need you.
Okay. What about the tenant's personal property?
Put it out except for the bedding and the clothes.
Except for the bed and stuff.
Is that what it says?
Well, they can keep some of the furniture. Except bed, clothes, and wearing apparel.
Yeah, may remove any personal property found.
What's the sheriff's job at this point? Keep the peace. Yep. I'm sure they just love that duty.
Yeah. Sheriff's job.
What's your role in this process?
Stay away.
As the agent, what's your job?
Stay
Stay away.
Redirect.
Okay. That takes care of the law chapters. Now we'll get into a different type of law. The next two chapters, and I don't want you to turn
Can
the
we ask
page.
you something before? What happens if the tenant replies the complaint? Because of any reason, I mean,
He what?
just to gain time.
He does what? Challenge you?
Yeah. So he gains, how much time? Another
Could
5
be a
days?
month, 2 months.
So he, maybe it's a modus operation of that person to do that.
Mhm.
So you'll be in court for 1 or 2 months. or
No,
will
you may
lose-
not be in court, it just may take that long.
So is he paying rent for that 2 months?
I haven't paid my rent for the last 4 months, you're asking me about your turn.
No, can the judge?
So that he may end up losing all that money, so you cannot get possession of whatever personal effects that person may have.
Yeah.
Or you have to go to
But
another.
there's another statute, it's statute 4715, that says you have to put the tenant on notice regarding their personal property. You have to send it to the last known address, which would be the apartment, which means they'll never see it. And you have to wait 15 days, and then you can do whatever you want to with personal property.
Auction.
You'll find all this information in the Landlord and Tenant Act.
Do they get an option to get some of their stuff out? New York, they do.
Yeah.
To go in and,
Yeah.
the sheriff lets them go in for like a couple of minutes and clean out what they want. They do that here as well?
Yeah. Again, that depends on the landlord. Landlord says, I don't want them in there anymore, or the landlord says, hey, let them take it, that's what I have to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay, before we turn into the next chapter,
Before we move on, can I just give, I just have a question about something. Going back to the evictions, for example, this is a true story. My son, withheld rent.
where's the story from?
Florida, Palm Beach County.
Okay.
My son withheld, rent from the landlord, because of, termites and other issues, but the city had violated the landlord as well for some code issues. I told my son not to pay the rent. This went on for 2 months. The landlord turned around and gave him a 3-day notice, so he challenged it. And he had to write this whole, spiel in court. He never got a court date notice, even though he kept calling to find out so that he can appear. And he did get to keep the rent money, but he had to move out. And the eviction is still in place, even though it was zero money to the landlord.
Right.
It makes no sense, especially if the landlord had.
Because he didn't pay. The landlord not living up to their responsibility is not necessarily a right for you not to pay.
But if the AC wasn't working and there was termite issues, are you kidding me?
Did you put him on written notice?
Yeah. And so the judgment was that he didn't have to pay, but he did move out. But it's still a record. It's still an eviction, isn't it? It's still considered.
I honestly don't know how that would show it in the record.
I wonder because there's no balance, but.
But I think making sure that you document the details of it while it's still fresh.
Right.
So you have it for the future.
Right.
Following the same point, can you in the future look for the records of any tenant or potential tenant?
Yeah, you can do a background check, you can do credit check, just like you can for
But you
anything else.
you can tell them that they're gonna accept their offer because of that?
Because of what?
Because if they have a black history record, meaning that they were evicted before,
There's a lot of.
can you tell them that they're not eligible to?
I would watch.
Can a landlord?
I would suggest that you discuss that with your attorney. I'm not the person to advise you on that.
I would like just pay my.
Can a
You're at, no, I'm saying, who am I right now?
Realtor.
I'm a realtor, that's who you're supposed to be.
Take a teammate?
Even if I know the answer.
Well, just give us
I'm
the
still-
answer just for who has.
You need to protect yourself, because then they're gonna say, oh, the realtor told me this.
Understand this, you open your mouth and make a statement, you have a license that says you're an expert. So you better make sure that what comes out of that mouth is correct. And the problem of it is, he didn't tell me the whole story.
Wait, was this question based on a agent, like, from an agent standpoint, or a
Tenant of the.
landlord?
Yeah.
Landlord.
Okay, so then it'll be different.
As a landlord, you have the
Because,
right.
I
You
mean,
have the right to say no, right?
Yeah, but the landlord asks the agent about it, or he does it by
The agent's
himself?
not a lawyer.
It's an
That's the thing.
application.
I mean,
There's a bunch of.
Guys, you gotta stop
To
talking. You
investigate.
can't hear.
To investigate if the tenant has records that may affect my income.
Yeah, well, if you run a credit report and a criminal report and a background report and it shows, it's like anything else. Those could all be reasons why you wouldn't want that person as a tenant. Yeah, they've been evicted 3 times.
But the thing is, this responsibility of the realtor or the agent, the sales
Not the
agent,
realtor.
that run with the.
No, it's
No.
not.
No, it's not.
Can you
repeat that?
She said, isn't it the agent's responsibility to run these credit reports and background reports? No. Tenant does it, and that way we have it to give it to the listing agent or landlord. Or landlord does it themselves. Depends on the situation. My job is to get a tenant to do what? To help them get in the unit. And then adios amigos.
I would like 3%. Right.
Okay,
I'm getting.
I have 2 terms.
Are we in chapter 8 now?
Yeah, I want you to turn in the check.
No, actually. Yeah, but I think it's
Okay. How many of you own property in here in the state of Florida? Okay, so this should be an easy chapter for you. Now, I've got two terms on the board. Title, which is what chapter 8 will be about, and deed, which will be what the chapter 9 is about. Those of you who own property here in Florida, can you show me the title to your property?
It's not paid off, the deed show, not.
No, that's
The deed.
Yeah.
The title
company has it.
Unless you own it. If you own the, no, if you own it and everything
better
is
get it.
paid.
No, you get it, the title is when you paid off the whole house.
If you pay off the house.
And the deed is that you have the mortgage, I think the title is ready.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes or no?
What's the question?
No.
The question.
No.
Yes. What's the
Okay,
question?
listen to me.
Can you ask the question?
I can't have that in this chapter. Because there's terminology and shit in here you've never heard in your life. And I don't want to hear your dissertation of this information. Is that crystal clear? You got a question, ask the question to me. Not to anybody else in this room. Because they
Don't know.
aren't going to make sure you pass the test. It's not their job. If you don't understand what I said because my thick
Accent.
accent.
So what is the question again?
But actually, I don't have a accent because I live in a southern state. Florida is a southern state, they can't figure it out. I realize it's another world starting at Palm Beach County.
So what is the question?
I should have said universe because that'd probably be closer.
Then what is the question again?
Hmm?
What is the question again?
I don't know. I'm trying to remember. This is for abandoned, but I get confused. What's something for you? Okay, my question is this. You own property in the state of Florida. I want to know, if you own property in the state of Florida, can you show me the title to your property?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
I guess yes.
No.
A deed.
Maybe you paid off it's paid off.
Yes.
It's not saying anything, it's
Yes.
your property, yes, the answer is yes.
Wait, if you give an answer.
He didn't give any more specifications, he just said you own the property. So yes,
No way.
he's not giving any details.
Okay, can we do this without talking? Is that possible? I don't think it is, but let's try. Now, you know your choices. My question is this. If you own property in the state of Florida, can you show me the title to your property? If you say yes, raise your hand.
Yes.
If you say no, raise your hand. Let me ask you a question. Do you think you can show me a bundle of rice?
No.
Because a bundle of rights is intangible. You'd have to read the statutes to find those rights. Can you show me the deed to your property?
Yes.
No.
What's the second word?
Instrument.
Instrument. That means it's a piece of paper. Because the title is your rights to the property, written on this document called a deed, which you got a copy of at closing, which about 8 weeks later, you got the original.
Oh, yeah, I do have it.
Yeah, but you take that deed even if you're.
But I'd be willing to bet money you don't know where it is. And you paid $400,000 for that piece of paper, and you don't even know where it is. You don't know when it says, you don't know which one it is. It's frightening.
I know. When you're gonna enroll the kids to school, they ask you for the deed in the communities, because the school that belongs to that specific.
Because that deed, which is a piece of paper, shows that you have rights in property in Florida.
Yes. That happened to me,
How many of you own your car free and clear?
I had in the past, but now I'm not.
Can you show me the title to your car?
Yes.
No, but you can show me the title certificate, which is a piece of paper, because title is a bundle of rights.
Well, but the certificate.
You want to see your rights for your car? Go look at the statutes in the state of Florida. You want to see the rights that you have in your real property? Go read the statute. Or your deed, whichever you prefer.
Okay, so it's intangible. What means title? Intangible.
So we're going to talk about the bundle of rights before we talk about the instrument to convey them. Now, I'm going to start this chapter off with this little scenario. When it comes to real estate, you have 4 options. You can own it, you can lease it, you can live with someone else, or you can live under the bridge. That's your 4 choices. And tell me it's not. Well, that'd be the same as under the bridge.
You can go black card too.
Some tells me our discussion is going to be about the rights that you receive in a deed, in an ownership, and the rights you receive in a lease. Because that's really your 2 options. Or you lease it, you own it.
Isn't it crazy? You have to work to live. Like, if I didn't work every day, I would have to, I couldn't eat. It's kind of crazy.
Sure you could.
I can eat a pigeon if I shot over the rock.
No. You gotta realize where you are.
Oh yeah, I can eat coconuts.
No? Never mind. I'm not going back. There's a lot of widows here.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Go to King's Point.
Oh man, I'm working on Palm Island.
If you
don't
go
know
to
how many
King's Point and
opportunities I
you're not
had
in
to
a
walk
walk
for
or you're doing good, you're
I was
a
like-
candidate.
Stop.
There are jobs that we don't from.
I just handed out business cards.
Okay.
Oh my God.
In this chapter, we're going to learn how to speak title. Let me ask a question. What kind of an estate do you have? Do you have a fee simple estate or life estate or joint tenancy?
Revocable trust, early bird.
You have a trust. Okay, I just hadn't gotten to the trust.
What's a truck?
What's a trust? It's a legal device where the property is put into a trust.
Oh, so it was handed down?
No, so
Not necessarily.
they can sue.
There is someone,
A grade 4.
if I'm not mistaken, I get paid to do this course.
That's my mom.
Being so fast.
I don't get paid enough.
And it makes you feel better, huh?
I don't need to feel bad. I just need you to be
After
quiet.
this class, you.
I didn't even cancel.
Ask for the right, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody here a teacher? Teacher.
No, but I'm a mother, and I'm pissed at the young children who are here, who would just talk so disrespectfully and waste my time.
I'm a teacher.
That's one of them. He's a teacher?
I'm sorry for wasting your time. I'll build you something nice at the end of the class. I'll build you like a
All right.
nice makeup stand.
All right, all right. Come on.
guys.
Come on.
Let your.
Oh, what the hell was the teacher? Stop talking for 2 seconds.
I couldn't hardly say.
Yeah, I was trying to. Trust me.
And then there's someone named to be responsible for it. That person's called a trustee. So, no, I'll do that later.
We're
No.
not talking about trust right now, though, right?
No, we're not going anywhere near a trust right now. It's not even in the book. But it is a very common form of ownership.
What's the benefit?
Huh?
What's the benefit?
Control of the property, taxes,
It's better?
depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I'm just sorry you asked.
I'll look it up.
It's not a simple yes or no. There's a lot of reasons. But you realize with the people we have here and all the retired people that are here, there's a lot of in the estate planning. Some of the estates that we'll talk about here will actually go beyond what's in the notes, are very common in a Century Village or a Kings Point 55+ communities. It's designed for tax purposes, but more for estate planning. What's gonna happen to the property? Who's it gonna go to when I croak? And there's umpteen zillion ways of potentially doing that. The reason that we study this is I have to figure out who the owner is. Because when I fill out my listing agreement or my sales contract, I gotta make sure I've got the right people on there. So I need to be able to look at a deed and understand who the owner is. Or realize it's an unusual situation and maybe we should touch base with our title company and let them take a look at it to make sure we're not overlooking anything. So that's kind of how this chapter fits into your future. A whole lot more than you would think. Because in every deal, I've got to legally identify the seller and the buyer. If I can't legally identify those people, I don't have a valid document. All right. Let's go to page 166, lines 7 through 22. Let's put a bracket around that if you will, please. 166, that's 1 and 2 sixes.
7 through what?
Starting with 7 through 22. You'll notice there are 3 terms: land, real estate, and real property. Which one's pure physical?
Land.
What's the difference between land and real estate?
The land is just a piece of land, and the real estate is improvements that humans have made to that land to make it better.
Okay. So land is what exists before we show up. Then when we start adding structures and infrastructures and things to it, that's real estate. What's the difference between real estate and real property? The bundle of rights.
The rights, yeah, that includes the rights.
So it's kind of, going up the hill. And then in the gray box, you have the definition of real property. This definition, as you see, comes straight out of 475. You will notice that 475 uses real property and real estate as synonyms. So unless I get a question that point blank asks me the difference between real property and real estate, those terms will be interchangeable. Why? Because 475 says so. Now, most of the chapter, what are we going to be talking about?
Property rights.
Property rights. Do I have rights to the physical real estate?
Yes.
Yeah. If you'll notice at the bottom of the page, it talks about the physical components of land. And if we mosey over to the next page, you're aware that your property rights go to the center of the earth?
Yes, some minerals and everything you find.
So.
So you can mine on your own property.
Yep. And as you see the pie there, into the sky. So I'm gonna put a toll booth up over my house. Because I'm writing the pattern of planes coming into the Bug Airport. Left New York to get away from that. I thought about that one, except it wasn't New York.
So if you buy a piece of land, you can dig underneath it and build like, underground house or something?
Yeah, unless, of course, the statute, state, local, and federal prohibit it. You have to realize that we have all these wonderful rights, and then we got the rest of the world restricting them.
Yes, the government mostly.
Previous owners,
How's America?
the builder
How would you?
affected property that you purchased from them because they put deed restrictions. They put community restrictive covenants on the whole community.
The owner, the original owner.
Yeah, the developer. No, not necessarily the original owner, but the developer. I'm not quite sure who the original owner was.
And the developer would do that for what purpose? Just because that's how they want it?
Create a specific atmosphere.
Okay.
At the bottom of the page, under that physical components of real estate, you got surface, subsurface, and air rights. Let's start with surface rights. If you'll notice on the top of page 167, lines 1 through 13, put a bracket around that, and put a star beside of riparian rights.
Oh, we studied this weekend. We studied this.
Line 3 where it says riparian rights.
Oh.
Which one would deal with lakes, oceans, and seas? No, littoral. Riparian is rivers,
Rivers.
running water.
Oh, yeah.
On line 3, you got that phrase which says, riparian rights are associated with land abutting a flowing waterway, such as banks of a river or stream.
And this is ocean and sea? Good swallow.
I always like using the word lake for littoral, and rivers for riparian.
So even if he doesn't, even if they don't own it, they can use it.
Have rights to
Yes,
it.
they
So
can use-
can he build like a water wheel?
It depends.
Depends where you're at.
See it, when you look at this, so I have rights to the water that my property abuts. I can't tell you what those rights are gonna be, because they're affected by current and previous owners, or by the city, county, and federal government. For example, intercoastal. you wanna redo your, dock, you have to get permission from the Army Corps of Engineers to start with. Then you gotta get permission from the city it's in, if it's in the city, and then you gotta get the county's permission.
Which means you're never gonna
I
get
just
it.
want to have a house.
So after that,
That ain't happening.
you already give up to replace your desk.
Yeah.
Alright,
Thank you.
like I said, this chapter's gonna be full of terminology, a lot of it you've never heard before. At the bottom of the page, you have that gray box with 4 different terms. Let's put a bracket around that box. I want you to look at it because I have a question. My question is, I want to know the order in which those 4 things happen in nature. If it was running, flowing, it would be considered repaired. But those canals usually are probably littoral.
It looks to me that is in order.
Because what we have here with the canals is very unusual in most other places. You have lakes, you have little streams, you have rivers, you have waterfalls. Okay. Which one of those 4 happens first?
Accretion, I think.
Because that rock, dirt, and silt has to come from someplace. It just doesn't magically appear. Take the Mississippi River and the tributaries that run into it. What happens second?
Religion.
Well, if you read alluvion, it says new deposits of land as a result of. Oh, something tells me. It's accretion. How's alluvion spelled?
I-O-N.
I-O-N?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now you gotta know what the last one is.
Yeah.
It's the only one. I remember as a kid, I had 2 aunts and uncles who lived up in Ohio, near Toledo. And there was a river up there. I don't know which one it was now. But I remember that they had a little cabin, and this river, of course, being, just a little kid, this river looked like it was, 8 miles wide. It was probably 300 or 400 feet. But what I saw, and I thought about it one time when I was doing this, when I first saw it, I could look right across to the other side, straight across. And then the next time we were there, which was a couple of years later, I noticed that you could see land out there. And the next time I came, it was a whole lot bigger, and there were little saplings growing on what was going to be an island in the middle of that river. Which means what was happening? All that rock, dirt, and silt was coming down from upstream. And for whatever reason, whatever stopped it, it started depositing in that area. And the more it deposited, that reliction is the idea that it just keeps building and building, and the water starts getting what? Pushed away, off to one side or the other. And the last time I was there were trees there that probably were 10, 15 years old. But you look at the Mississippi River. Constantly, that land, you know, what's underneath of it, because the boats that they built, the paddle boats, were built for what reason? It's a huge river, but in a lot of places, it's only a foot or two deep. And then the next time you come, that dirt may be over here. I never realized how snaky the Mississippi River is, especially when you get down south. I was interviewing for a job, so I had to fly out to Oakland. And that was the first time I'd ever flown directly over the Mississippi River, at least in that part. And it was this. I was amazed. Because I called the stewardess over and I said, "Is that the Mississippi River?" She said, "Yeah." But it makes sense. And of course the Delta, where all that dirt come from? Somebody's farm in Iowa or Indiana or wherever else the water's coming from.
Isn't it crazy that when you're in a plane, you can actually see the zones?
Mm-hmm.
Like how specific the zones are they all marked out?
Yeah, when I think about the legal description chapter, and I'm in a plane, because it's different if you stay on the East Coast than if you get in the center of the state or you get out west. The way the land was divvied up was different. Texas was already divvied up when we when we got Texas. Questions on those? Because the type of question you would get here, it's not a star, but the type of question you get here is they either give you the term in 4 answers, which would be one of those 4, or they give you a definition and give you those 4 statements. So, again, vocabulary test. All right. If property isn't real property, what is it? Personal property. If it started out as personal property but became real property, what's it called? It started out as personal property, but it then became part of the real property. We call that a fixture.
Call what, I'm sorry?
Fixture. You'll see that on the next page.
Say that again? I'm sorry.
Say what again?
What you just said about real property and personal?
When does personal property become real property?
Okay.
So when you say real property, you mean, and it's the same thing as a real estate.
Yes. So I have the air conditioning unit sitting in the garage. At that point, the unit is? 3 days later, it is placed on the slab, it's bolted down, it's plugged into the system. It is now fixture, which means it's now permanent part of the real property. Now, is this an area that's going to be critical to us as agents?
Yes.
Does the refrigerator in the garage stay
No.
or go?
If it's just-
So how do we legally, if we have to, how do we legally decide if an item is personal property or real property?
If it's attached to.
I will use one of the tests that's on the next page. Irma.
Oh, Irma,
But
okay.
if it's a fixer or fix it, I don't want to say proper, to the real estate property or the real property, then it's part of it.
Right. If it's not, it's personal property.
Yeah. Not personal property.
But you understand that the word fixture means it started out as what?
Personal.
And has become part of the real. Now, you'll notice it says there are 4 ways to determine or to test for whether an item is personal property or a fixture. The first one is the intent of the parties. The intent of the parties. The first thing the judge would want to see is the contract and all addendas and supporting evidence. Because they want to see the intent of the parties. The intent of the parties is what's on that contract. And who put their words on that contract?
Sell it.
Landlord.
You did.
Oh.
I'm not mistaken, you prepare the contracts, don't you? Okay, so you forgot who you were again. Okay. We have another class starting out the first year. No problem. You don't have to wait 30 days to take it again. Assess flighting.
Yeah.
Would you consider that personal property or fixture? How about a washer and dryer?
No.
Are you ready for this?
Picture.
The contracts that we use today, the last version of it, when they made the changes to the version we have now, the washer and dryer used to be part of the pre-printed page, which means it was fixture. Now, if you don't include it in the contract, the seller can take it with them. How do we know that? It cost one of our agents $2,000 to buy a washer and dryer. The contract didn't say anything about a washer and dryer.
So the agent has to pull out a different.
Did you screw up? Did the agent screw up, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, then who the hell do you used to make the pay for it?
I'm sorry.
I know Ben, you want Ben to split it with you. I love that when an agent screws up and wants Ben to split it with him. You've been kidding me.
Can you go and offer up and get some like 50?
No, you have to replace the ones that were there. And they were those two monstrosities. Yeah.
What is the general guideline between what's a fixture and what's personal property?
Whatever the parties agree to.
So, things that are affixed to the walls?
Like,
Like flat screen TVs?
what'd your contract say?
Didn't.
Didn't. Then it don't stay. Because leaving it off the contract, it appears that the intent of the parties was not to make it a part of the contract. Therefore, I can take it.
That's what happened with the washer and dryer.
Yep.
What about the refrigerator?
Is there one appliance that legally has to stay? Because in New York there is.
Refrigerator, for example?
The stove, you have to supply the stove.
No.
No?
So what,
You don't have to leave the stove? Okay.
No
That's what we need to
In
know.
Florida?
In New York, you have to supply.
You can take everything?
Even the refrigerator in the kitchen?
You selling just the cabinet?
What's your contract say?
You have to leave the other.
So you just.
Tell me what your contract say. Does the
Whatever.
contract say refrigerator, yes or no?
Okay, so whatever you agree.
Thank you, I've said that 3 times.
Yeah, and there's no legal thing you have to leave.
That's why we have a contract.
Except,
And we prepare that, so we have to get this shit straight. Or you're gonna be paying for stuff.
So legally, appliances don't have to be included
No.
unless it's in the agreement.
Right.
So we.
Wait, I got a question over here, yes.
So if you were writing a contract, you would wanna even just say like ceiling fans.
Now, well, let me start with this. The contract, on the first page of the contract, left third of the way down, they give you a list of the refrigerators and
Oh, that's
so,
fine.
there's already some there. You have to add to
Oh.
that or even take away.
Oh.
The seller says, listen, I just bought this side-by-side refrigerator. It doesn't go. I'm willing to put the one in the garage back in here, or just leave it the way it is. You can have the one in the garage, but I'm taking this other one with me. So the one in the garage, from the landlord, from the owner's point of view, is fixture. But the one in his kitchen, and 10 of the parties, but see, that's where we come into play. Because it could be the other way.
Excuse me, what happens if there's something that's wired in through the house? Like,
Radio.
surround.
Intercom system.
Like surround sound?
Okay.
Because it's wired through the walls, does that mean it can stay, or it has to explicitly say it includes or excludes?
So it can be negotiated. I've seen it stay, I've seen it go, I've seen them pull the wires through. You think of it, and over the years I've heard, but basically, see, if I had, watch this, everybody watch me. Go, excuse me. If you're not sure, put it in writing. If you're not sure, put it in writing. Ask the parties what they want to do. Why? It's not your deal. And what you think should go, or don't think should go, doesn't mean anything. That contract's. So that contract needs to be a meeting of the minds between the parties. I'm the facilitator there to make sure we get it in black and white. I saw him, yes.
On an MLS listing, they have in general, I don't think it's point for point, or I might be wrong, of what is staying. Or like they'll say hookup, for washer dryer hookup.
The thing that pisses me off the most
What?
is they put fully furnished. I'd like to strangle an agent that puts fully furnished. Tell me what fully furnished means. I guarantee you, if I asked this room to write down what they considered fully furnished, I'd have 15 or 20 different interpretations at minimum.
So about partly furnished.
What the hell does that mean?
Partially furnished.
Steve, if I want to make sure we don't have World War III the day of closing, because of the walkthrough, I better put it in black and white. And the contract doesn't necessarily have to, it's called C attached inventory.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Or,
Don't put it.
don't do it, and get your checkbook out.
They're gonna find from their pocket.
And you know what, that won't happen but once. Well, I don't know, this group maybe.
No pay.
Looking farther down the page, the first one, the intent of the parties is the sales contract, is the best example of intent of the parties. Relationship between the parties is a lease. For example, you have a beauty salon. They have the chairs. They have the bowls to wash hair. Are those things fixtures or personal property? Generally speaking, unless indicated otherwise, they would be considered personal property. Why?
They can take it.
Not because they can take them, because they're necessary for the use of of the business.
But if you sell the business as it is, like the business.
What as is mean?
Well, like if you're selling the business, the hair salon, you're selling it.
Okay.
Then you will consider a fixture, no?
I don't know, what's your contract say?
Okay, well, it's up to you.
You understand that there's not a yes or no answer to that question?
Yeah.
What's your contract say?
What's
Whether it's a
your-
lease or whether it's a sales contract, what's it say?
Same,
Yes.
a lot of houses or they have this huge antenna and
Mhm. Yeah,
that
for
could be
cable
in the
TV.
agreement to leave it there.
Yeah. Well, I see, I don't think that this disc belongs to the owner. I'm feeling the disc belongs to Dish Network.
How about if it's a house?
Same thing,
Oh.
probably even more likely. The third one is called method or degree of attachment. We had one of those not long ago. And here's an example of here. Let's go back to the television on the wall. You got two issues there, people. You got a monitor, and you've got
Sweetheart.
brackets. Do the brackets stay or do they go?
All that goes, I consider that personal.
My house has a bracket.
What about the hole in the wall?
Then you have to patch it up and leave it,
I'm buying the house as is. Which part of as is don't you get?
I don't know, with all the holes. As is.
It still doesn't tell me if the brackets stay or go. It still doesn't tell me who has to fix the wall.
So it means that before we show any property, we have to know everything the specific of that.
Now,
that property.
before I do a contract, I need to know that. If they don't like the damn house, we don't have to worry about the
Oh,
inventory.
but then they like the house with, as is,
Uh-huh.
and then you find out, no, this refrigerator is not gonna be there, from the garage, gonna
Right.
be there, then you change the whole thing.
All right,
So when, whatever you show is not real, what are you gonna sell?
that's why we put it in a contract and an inventory.
Is there,
That's why
So
good
when you're
listing
showing
agents
it-
make it clear if there's things that, obvious things that would normally stay that aren't, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Like the, wall unit in the bedroom that covers the whole wall behind the bed. Goes.
Built in?
I don't know, but I'm taking.
Like what?
So now we have to figure out, okay, if you're gonna take it,
What are you gonna put it in?
who's gonna take care of the wall? Because there's gotta be some sort of problem with the wall. Probably if you paint it 2 or 3 times, since that's been there, it's probably a totally different color. But the bottom line is, people, with all these things, it's a matter of agreement more than not. How about this, for the method of annexation? You have a portable air conditioning unit. You converted the garage to a room, and you're gonna put one in there for air. You take the portable air conditioning unit, you open the window, slide it in the window, put the pull the brackets out, louvers out, mount the brackets, plug it in, turn it on.
In the garage.
Fixture,
It's a fixture.
or personal property?
It depends if there's any.
The agreement,
behind.
whatever is in the agreement.
Oh.
Let's assume we don't have an agreement yet.
It's a fixture.
What would it normally be considered, personal property or fixture?
Personal.
Fixture.
Personal property.
Personal, yeah.
If you took the same unit, went below the window, cut a hole in the wall, put the unit in, framed around it, inside and out, and plugged it in, now you got a fixture. Because of method of annexation.
What is it again? Method of what?
Method of attachment, they call it. In other words, how was it attached?
Yes.
So, seeing these things, I have to make sure every item that would be affected by these four in a given transaction is addressed. Then the last one is adaptation of the article. We have a gas station that's being sold. It has gas pumps. Are gas pumps fixtures or personal property? Assuming that we don't have anything in black and white yet.
Fixtures.
Why?
Because if you're saying a gas station, so that is what.
Because it's necessary for the operation of the reason the property is being purchased. Except for the fact that Texaco owns the
Equipment.
equipment. But the bottom line is, what I take away from this every time is, if it ain't black and white, I'm gonna be paying for it.
What about the,
And, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. What one set of people gonna do is totally different than the next group of people. And you don't agree with either one of them. And the fact that you don't agree with either one of them, what's that got to do with anything? The price of bread.
so the TV bracket is a fixture and you can't remove it, right?
No. Personal.
I can remove anything.
Well, it says if you remove it and it causes damage, it's considered a fixture.
Okay.
And that has big holes in it.
Unless the parties agree to something different.
It's just funny because the house I bought had a bracket, had nothing in it, but they left the bracket. I was like, why'd they leave that bracket? Because of this.
Lazy,
Right.
passionate, and painless.
So,
Was the bracket listed in the contract?
No, but it was there. When I took it off, and I have nice.
Holes?
Nice.
That's not-
I did.
Contractually, the turnkey definition,
What's the
has to be
standard?
also disclosed, all the items,
Yeah.
or the turnkey.
Yeah, one more term. Turnkey. That's right down to the silverware. We had one where it was condo on the beach. And of course, they had a list of everything, and they were doing the walkthrough. And the lady was counting the towels and the sheets and whatever else it was in there. And she had the list with her. And she gets to the forks and there are only 11. The inventory said 12. So she was missing one fork. She says, I'm not closing until I get my fork.
Oh,
Please.
Agents wound up going to wherever. Fortunately, it was a common pattern and rather inexpensive. And they brought it to her and gave it to her on the closing day. Because they said, we'll bring it to closing. So basically, she wanted to place it.
So
the one for?
Turnkey,
It's ready.
general definition is bring your toothbrush.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
Everything else you might need is there. I don't know that it necessarily includes the
The
food.
forks.
But again, that's why what? We can sit here and disagree what turnkey might mean.
Yes,
How do we prevent that problem?
I had
We
a.
ask and agree to it and put it in black and white. And then we don't have an issue.
I had a case where turnkey meant paint, fresh paint, new carpet, all that, but it didn't have any items inside or anything. So it says turnkey.
You see, but you understand, people, you can't do that. With everything we just talked about here, and you put turnkey or fully furnished or partially furnished, and you don't have an inventory list, you should get smacked around.
You know, and it's very common that agents.
Yeah, it is, it's called
put
being
that.
lazy shits. Yes.
If you sell a house and you remove like all the ceiling fixtures, do you have to replace it with something, or do you have to cap it?
What's your contract say?
Do you have to cap it?
Like the contract says lighting fixtures.
If it says lighting fixtures, then you have.
But if it says we're taking the fan in the bedroom, if the fan in the bedroom does not convey.
Okay, you got
So
that
you
black
have
and
to
white.
put- Yeah, you have to
Party
black and white.
decided.
So by law, do you have to leave
Does the party sign that agreement?
Yes, but there's no signature, leave it.
Then you take it down.
But what, could you leave the wires hanging?
No, you need to cap it off.
That's what I wanna know.
That doesn't mean you will, but that would be the appropriate thing to do.
It's illegal,
It's not a matter of legal or illegal.
Really?
It's more ethical. Ethical.
There you go.
So what's the most important thing you've learned so far in chapter 8?
Whatever.
Right, that's
Right. And on that note, why don't we take a break? Just a comment here. You know when you open that door, it's supposed to close?
Yeah.
Please make sure it does. Makes the air conditioner go nuts.
You say that every day.
I know.
You say
I'll bring my gun next time.
Every time.
Try not to Oh, it is? Really? I would've got calamari or something.
Yes, they are. So magnetic. So you can pull them right over. You don't have to leave it on the front.
But that's not the point.
Unless you wrap it.
My husband said, what did you learn from this job? He said, in Florida, that's
And that's something you have to remember when you're working with people.
Yeah, that's what we
Because
have.
they're gonna assume things.
It's gonna be hard for him, because he's free.
Everything you're saying about writing it up, be smart.
Right.
Of course, you have to itemize everything.
Yeah.
But a house can't be sold without a stove. All fixtures have to be given, not capped, but they have to be placed on the building's fixture. Like you take a good
So
one.
here you could, you don't have to.
You can take a fan, put a fixture, the right fixture, no, but you have to do that. Totally different.
If it is, I'm not aware of it.
I think maybe what you said about the cap, because that's danger, it's dangerous to use the wires.
Or even if you, put the little cap in.
I mean, the one thing that's very similar is that the house has to be broom swept. And in New York, though, you have to seal the, okay, if you pull something off the wall, you should seal it. On the walkthrough, they can complain about that.
They'll complain about it again, too. It's a matter of somebody will pay for it.
Just really, just has to be ¿Cómo vas? ¿Todo bien?
Estudiaste este fin de semana que te vi preguntando preguntas. Yo no estudié nunca.
No, yo no estudié nada, pero lo que hice hoy, el capítulo 6, lo leí, lo hice de razón, pero está en razón. Y ahora, un poquito antes de llegar a lo que habíamos llegado, a tratar de ir al día.
No, a mí me va a tocar estudiar este fin de semana, porque si no, al final te está
Es demasiado.
Y las preguntas ya me cuenta que son todas, o sea, no son...
Pero como dice el resumen, yo creo
Sí.
que
A la novela ya vendrá. Y lo del zoning. Uy, sí, porque yo hice este curso en Denver. Y el zoning es una mamera. Sí, es bastante. Hay algunas diferencias, pero sí es muy parecido. Sí, porque tienes que poner el paralelo, el meridiano, y cada zona tiene una letra, y que tú tienes que definir la zona de lo que estás haciendo. No, tienes que ser específicamente exactamente la estado ubicada en la propiedad que estás teniendo. Sí, pues en Denver fue así, y allí fue donde yo perdí muchísimas preguntas. Pero,
o sea, que te limitas ahí en los juegos.
no, Artica, yo creo
O sea,
que
que
tiene que haber un son. No, sí, en cualquier parte. No. A ver, te explico. Cuando tú vas a vender una propiedad, tienes que especificar las letras de donde se ubica esa propiedad en el zoning. Y eso es lo que es de confuso. No, es that one. No, it hasn't. Yeah, it's that one. I saw it in the Boca Raton Connect, las mamás de Boca Raton, en Facebook.
¿Ah, sí?
Sí, y ahí salió.
O sea, como yo no soy mamá, no puedo saber.
No. A menos de que, no sé, transgender. Sí. No, bueno, aquí no se puede, así la ciudad de Palm Beach te protege. Sí, ¿te acuerdas? Pero no, lo federal. Sí, tenaz. Acá inclusive está la noticia.
So he doesn't want us to come.
He goes, no, they don't have to come. It's too
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, is that okay? I don't know if it's gonna help, but.
Pamukasson is due this week, no, Pamukasson is due. Oh, I think next week, this is like, this week is half a week. 25 is half a week.
Porque me mudé para acá y empecé a trabajar en maceración de hidrocarburos.
¿Ah, sí?
De Colorado, ajá. Allá en sí, o sea, una compañía de
No.
Every time I think I know something, I don't think I know something, and then I go to think I know it. So it'll pop in my head and No, I didn't review, I reviewed up until almost that time. I didn't have to work.
Oye, sigue. ¿Cuánto sale más de él?
No, el kiwi vale 80, pero si compras un turismo, 100. Y el 4, te dan, normalmente es como un paquete, te dan como un feedback.
O sea, por el lado.
Por la no, pero si vendes 5 al mes, te montas
Claro.
$12,000.
Sí. ¿Y hay demanda con eso?
En Denver había, porque están los broncos, la gente de mucho nivel donde yo vivía, mucho más cerca. Donde yo vivía mucho más cerca. Se llama Highland Ranch, en Colorado. Aquí hay 15, pero también hay gente. Dice, allá es todo el mundo. Es una comunidad de arrendar y hay gente con coches. Exacto. Uno los ve en la calle y uno se imagina, uy, viven en una mansión y no viven en un apartamento.
Exactamente, that's what this guy told me. Because I said right now. Yeah, but we'll have, I didn't realize though that I have to notify the state that if I'm not going to take it, I need to let them know Saturday before. Well, it's the same thing. They represent us. Por un día, hasta el pago, por levantar hoy más cama. Something wasn't happening, and I wasn't going to This is like 30 years later.
¿Tú cuando te mudas, cómo te mudas? ¿Con quién te mudas?
Lo que pasa es que la última
But those are. Right or wrong, I don't know. I don't have any. I have other things that I don't know. But I think it's gonna be fun. It's some practice. Years ago, I bought
And then they went to arbitration, and we won, and they gave her back her $500 security deposit, which they refused, and the letter, but the letter is what carried more weight.
Right.
To help her.
Wow.
And I had her file on her credit report.
Typically, something that she get a correction. Low down. There was nothing that she didn't get at. So I was very
And so, actually, I know, but I don't, you know, let me ask him.
It was cute how somebody just had this but I don't want to come and change it looked really fresh.
Yeah, I'm gonna touch it on the map.
Did you talk?
And then I'll see if I can.
How much I can pay them? Give me an example for a whole day.
For all day. It might come out to $20.
That's kind of. When I bought that
If you ever need ammo, let me know.
It's November 2nd.
Hey, what's up?
And you just have to break it up and just go over it. I said, it's what kind of bad time is this? You're gonna pick up with station. I can stay over here.
Like, no, I'd rather see you.
You're the first person I thought of.
They can't. I got it. Okay, let's continue. All right, I'd like for everybody to do me a favor. Take your pen or pencil, put it in the back of your book, and close it. It is illegal until I tell you to touch a pen or pencil. It is critical that this time you halfway listen. know that's hard. Let's go back to the premise that we started with at the beginning of the chapter. When it comes to owning real estate, or being involved with real estate, I have three options. I can own it, I can lease it, I can live with someone else, I can live under the bridge. I think we can eliminate the last two in our discussion. Maybe not in reality, but at least in the discussion. So that means basically there are two ways for me to have rights to real property. I can have them from the standpoint of having a lease, which will give me certain rights, or I can own it. There are more than one way to own real estate. Right off the bat, you can have one person own it, or you can have two or more people own it. You can have verbal leases, you can have written leases with an expiration date. There's all kinds of variety. What I found, and this is probably the one chapter that fascinates me more than others, because there's so much to it. I had a lady in class. She got the home in the divorce settlement. Now, normally what happens in that situation is, whichever spouse has to give up the property, signs a quitclaim deed transferring their rights to the other person. He didn't do that. Judge didn't do that for whatever reason. You have the divorce decree. He had instructed whoever did it to put a statement in that divorce settlement. And in there it said, this document is an instrument of conveyance. By putting that phrase in that document, what did they turn it into? A deed. She never got a deed. It was already built into that. I've never seen that before. All that, every time I see something new, I understand when I say I've never seen it before, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means exactly what I just said. I've never seen it before. And that's one thing you learn about this business. Don't say never. And don't say always. Because things are not never. Things are never always. I guess they're never until they're not never. All right, let's break down our two categories. And again, please just kind of step back. One category is called freehold estates. The other category is called leasehold. Which one would represent ownership?
Freehold.
You sure?
I mean, it kind of looks like, because lease.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Are you sure? It does not require dissertation of the information.
Yes.
Why?
Because it doesn't say lease.
Because this says what?
Lease.
I'm gonna take a wild guess. Something that says holding a lease would be a lease. In order to hold it free, what document do I need? A deed. So all freehold estates will have a deed. The rights on that deed will vary depending on the type of estate.
Sorry, can I ask you something about the leasehold?
No. Can't ask me about anything right now. When I'm finished, you can ask me whatever you want to. I want to back up for a second here. We said the title was a legal bundle of rights. What rights? That's a nice stand.
The rights of
What rights?
ownership. Ownership.
Well, a bundle obviously means there's more than one. So what are my rights?
Real property ownership rights.
That's not my rights.
Disposition, enjoyment, disposition, possession.
How about this? Let's open the book back up for a minute. And go to page 170. And you will see, starting with line 6 through 19, as a bracket.
Basic property rights?
Basic property rights, yes. At the bottom of the page, I have a statement I want you to write at the bottom of the page, right underneath your bundle of rights. And don't make it too big. This is a short story. All estates or tenancies have the bundle of rights unless the person giving those rights retains one or more of those rights.
Everything.
One or more of those rights.
You'll notice they use two terms there, estates and tendencies. They are interchangeable. An estate or a tenancy is a form of ownership that gives you those bundle of rights, or a certain degree of that bundle. I want to start with the term disposition. I want a definition of disposition.
No idea.
The right to sell.
The right to sell, the mortgage, the giveaway, the right to sell mortgage, and that you're a freeholder.
And give away,
Or part of it.
or a portion of the farm.
I'm very pleased that you can give me a list of things that would represent disposition. However, I didn't ask for a list. I asked for a definition.
To do whatever you want on property. You could be.
The right to sell mortgage.
The ability to get rid of any or all of my rights. Question: if I lease my property to you, have I exercised my right of disposition?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yeah. You're not disposing of them.
away.
Let me ask a question. If I lease it to you, do I still have the right of possession?
Yes.
No, I don't, you do. What the hell do you think your lease says? The lease says the landlord's gonna possess the unit, or you are? See, you're assuming that the word disposition means to sell. That's not a definition, that's an example.
Because it's got mortgage under it.
I add my new spouse to the deed. That is a form of disposition. I've given some of my rights away. Stupid. Disposition is giving away all or part of your rights. When I sell it, am I disposing of my rights? Yeah, in that case, not necessarily all of them. I reserve the right to go fishing in the lake that's at the back of the property for the rest of my life. When I was a kid in Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, they built flood control dams. My father's property was on one of the, was part of it, and they took it to eminent domain. My father was sold X amount of dollars. A pig, and he also seeded the banks of the dam. It was interesting to watch him basically almost sideways. And I was watching him out on the tractor at that time. But he reserved the right to use the lake because they turned it into like a summer camp. I don't remember who it was, what group it was, but it became a summer camp. And we had the right, anytime we wanted to go on property, use the lake. But that was part of, that's something that he didn't dispose of. He retained that right. So it's not always that if you sell something, you give up all your rights.
Was that on the writing?
Yeah. Yep, I'm part of it.
And you can sell with the property coming after.
Question.
So if he was to move from that home with the next person who moves into that home, would they automatically have rights?
For
to
the
that?
rest of his life and his kid's life.
Okay, so it's only,
So I still have, I would have the right, if I wanted to go up and go use that lake.
can you
Last time I was
transfer
there, I
that
saw,
to your kids?
last time, huh?
Can you transfer that right to your kids?
No, it ends with my
With you.
father's. And last time I was there, which was 30 years ago, I saw 4 rattlesnakes and 2 water moccasins. Besides, I'd probably like you in the water. Not so much rattlesnakes, but the water moccasins. They like the water. And when you live out in the boonies, it's interesting. All right. I have a lease in my hand, signed by the landlord, signed by the tenant. The lease, however, says nothing about the tenant's right to sublet or assign the lease. Can the tenant do such, given those facts?
No.
Not without permission.
What I want you to do first is, I want you to read that sentence I gave you before I ask the question.
All estates
All the states.
or tenancies have the bond
No, you don't do it
rights
that loud.
unless the person giving those rights retains one or more of those rights.
Is a lease in the state? Yes. Therefore, I would have the right to sublet or assign it unless the landlord restricted that right. And how many landlords do you think are going to restrict that right? Any of them that have any sense? Go home and look at your lease tonight. See if it lets you sublet or assign without the landlord's permission. But don't bother. I'll tell you what it says. No. But that statement's always in the lease. Why? Because if it wasn't, as a tenant, I couldn't sell it. I don't own it. But I could sublet it or I could assign the lease. Again, you got to get out of your head that disposition and selling are synonyms. Selling is just one example of disposing of your rights. Everybody okay so far? All right, now, close the book back. Not that I don't trust you. Now, we said that a freehold estate said we owned it free. But there's more than one way to own it free. One way is called fee simple estates. How long's a life estate for? Whose life?
Until the owner.
For the life.
Until the
Of the owner.
owner
Okay.
passes away.
Fee simple estate means that it's yours forever.
And it's, yeah, inheritable.
So that just keeps going. Like DuPont.
To your kids and generation after generation.
Depends.
Depends on will.
Yeah, it depends on what else is there.
Also feasible means you own it forever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, life,
No.
How long do you think a life estate meant would mean you own it?
For the life.
For your life, that's why they call it a life estate.
yeah, until the.
If you own it in a life estate, can you name someone to receive it upon your death?
Yes.
No.
Yes, you can. If you
Let me ask you a question. Do you have the right of disposition after you're dead?
No.
Okay, then you can't leave it to somebody. If I own it fee simple, can I leave it to somebody?
Yes.
And how I can do that varies. You already heard one, that's a trust. Question. Does your deed say fee simple or life estate?
I don't know.
Maybe free some.
And you paid how much for that piece of paper? And you can't answer those questions?
No idea.
And you tell me I don't understand why I need to know stuff that's in this chapter?
You know what the symbol is?
Do your other customers know?
No.
I'm glad I'm learning that.
Your
but now I
customers
know.
know.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing as an agent that you're learning this, yes.
Yeah. No, and as a person too.
No, I'm not worried about the person, I'm worried about the agent. They're less about the person.
If the deed holder is an estate,
I'm sorry?
if the deed is held by an estate, then is it?
The deed will have the people that have the visa. That person could be a trust.
Yes, that's what I'm sorry. If it is a trust, then that accounts for the, with the disposition of it after your death.
Mhm. My deed says I have fee simple. has my name and my wife's name on it. What happens if I die? What if she dies? It's interesting that the lady said, if I die, she gets it. And then when I said, well, what if she died? You said the kids get it. You know what? I have a red pen, and I can affect the rest of your life.
Putting you under the bridge.
That was really slick. And you bitch about us.
That's discrimination.
Can't be trusted either.
Can, Dale,
Yes,
can you clarify something for me? Because your statement just now said you're not privy to naming who gets it after, but I've used a life estate with vested remainder.
Well, do me a favor. Let me finish this first.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
You have knowledge that can get me in trouble.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. If I screw something up, it's way better. Because your background says you have to be aware of something like that. All right. There are 4 basic fee simple estates. One of them is called an estate estate and severalty is one type of fee simple. You can distinguish it from the rest because estate and severalty means there's one owner. That's why I put the word civil. How many of you have an estate and severalty? How many of you own your property in your own name? Then you have an estate and severalty. Might sound a little cold. I have an estate and severalty. Rather than saying, yeah, I own the house by myself. Well, which one sounds cooler?
One big word.
Does that mean your husband's name is not on there?
No, it means my wife's name is on
I know.
It's okay. I got an extra red pen that I need. Actually, it's a pencil. Now, if you have more than one owner, there are 3 basic estates.
Aside from a husband and wife?
Tenants in common. Tenants in entirety. Tenants in entirety, tenants in joint tenancy, and tenants in common. Where's your glasses?
in order for it to be intended by the entireties, it has to be husband and wife. In this state, that means that it'd only be two people. There's another term here.
Beneficiary designations. Yes, my slurs. I do things just under
Now, anybody that's writing right now, if you'd like me to take your book and throw it away, that'd be a real good idea. Not put that pencil down. Okay. Now, here's the thing that got me. Because when I think of survivorship, I think of going to my estate or to my heirs. Here, right of survivorship means it goes to the other owners, not the heirs of those owners. Now, only these two have right of survivorship.
Can you give an example of that?
So,
Yeah,
Because I don't get it.
when I get there. My wife and I, my wife and I own our home together. Tenancy by the entities, or estate by the entities. Remember, tenancy and estate are interchangeable. When I die, will she automatically get it?
Yep.
What will you need to be able to sell her house?
A death certificate.
A death certificate, because you'd have to prove I was dead. The second that you can prove I'm dead,
She owns it.
the survivorship kicks in. That's an example, that's the best example I can give you that you can relate to.
Okay.
Now, how about this one? The answer is one of those four. John and Mary Smith buy property with the right of survivorship. Bob and Sally Smith buy property with the right of survivorship. We know it's not an estate and severalty. Why?
Because it's
There were two people. So we have three possible answers. How many of you say it would be a tenancy in common?
It's two couples.
Answer the question. Don't start asking me one. You have to understand that when you get to the test, you can't ask questions. You have to read the question given and answer. Maybe that's the problem. How many of you say it would be a tenancy in common? I'll repeat it. John and Mary Smith buy property with the right of survivorship. How many of you say it would be a tenancy in common? How many of you would say it's a joint tenancy? How many of you say it's an estate by the entireties?
If they're married.
If they're married.
But you didn't join tenancy.
You said that they were married? I didn't hear the marriage. I said Mrs. Smith, so that would be the last. No, you didn't say they were married. So it's joint tenancy.
Can be brother and sister.
You guys let me know when you're through and I'll keep going, okay? The next time somebody in this room adds to my question, I'm taking 10 points, your first 10 points on the class test are gonna be read. answer the damn question as it's asked. You start, some of you, if you start doing this on the state exam, you'll get a 43. Because you may be answering the concept, but you're not answering the question. I don't need a dissertation of the information. I just want an answer to my question as it is worded. So we're going to try this one more time. John and Mary Smith buy property with the right of survivorship. We know it can't be the estate in 70 because that's only one person. We know that it can't be what?
Tenancy in common.
Why?
Because
Because it has survivorship, and tenancy in common does not have survivorship.
They're encouraged.
It could be a joint tenancy,
Yes.
or it could be an estate by the entirety. Except for one small problem. You would have to change my question to get it right, which I heard two people in the back do. Because it's the difference between the 74 and the 75 on the state exam. That's the difference. Because you didn't answer the question being asked. You answered your question. You got your question right. Unfortunately, it wasn't the one asked. So, in order for this to have applicability, I have to be told they're husband and wife. If it's right of survivorship, it eliminates tenancy in common. Doesn't eliminate tenancy by the entireties. Doesn't eliminate joint tenancy. Which one does your date say? Joint tenancy?
Yeah.
Does it say joint tenancy with the right of survivorship?
Yes.
Because if it didn't, it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Oh, so now I'm gonna check it tomorrow.
I saw one not long ago that was a tenancy in common. Because it was owned by two friends. And they bought it as tenants in common.
So what does that mean?
And the agreement was, they were 50-50. That could have been different, but that's what they agreed to.
So if one dies,
Another, one dies,
It ends.
his rights go to
It's beneficial.
his heirs.
okay.
Whereas in the joint tenancy, because of the survivorship. So if I want to make sure that when, let's say we are a joint tenancy. If you die, I don't want your rights going to your heirs. I want it to come back to the joint tenancy.
Can you do that with like a brother or sister?
Yeah.
The joint?
Right, so
That's where you'll see it a lot in families.
Okay, so if, okay.
Is that something
Okay,
that?
my brother and I purchased a home in his tenancy in common, so if something happened to one of us,
Goes to the heirs.
the tenancy ends
Yeah.
once there's the.
Based upon what you're telling me.
Did it go to the government?
I don't know what your document actually says. So I don't know for sure.
say that it just says the tenancy in common.
Which you can never come to those.
I don't think it says just that.
She doesn't
Oh,
adhere
okay.
to
If
the
you can put it in front of my face.
No, I don't know.
Was it here?
No, I'm just asking.
Oh, you're just asking, oh, okay,
Yes.
all right.
I don't.
Are those contracts when you're purchasing a home? Are those terms something that we can specify as homeowners, as purchasers, as buyers?
Yes, it depends. Well, in other words, if you and your brother were gonna buy property together, you could do one of these two. This one protects the initial parties. This one does not, because it doesn't have survivorship. So if you and your brother bought a tenancy in common, if there was no indication of how much you each owned, it would be 50-50.
But if something happens to one of us,
Which one you talking about?
the joint tenancy,
Uh-huh.
if something happened to one of us,
Your estate gets 0. Because survivorship means it goes to the owners, not the heirs.
Oh,
That's what I-
okay.
that's
What it says. See, that's what got me, because when I heard survivorship, I'm always thinking going to the heirs, going to my estate.
Right.
That's not what that means.
So joint, you don't really want joint tenancy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you're protected, but.
Let me ask you a question. I'm gonna ask you a question. Would you prefer that if your brother died, would you prefer all his rights to go to his family or to you?
Oh.
Well, then you would want survivorship. Would you not? Because survivorship means you get it.
You get it, then you can distribute, like,
You
if
know what?
you really wanted to share with his
Older
sons or
couples.
daughters or whatever.
Who have decided to buy a home together. They're shacking up. But seriously, I've seen it. They do they typically do joint tenancy with the right survivorship. So that the heirs of either one of them can't come running in and force the other one to sell or whatever the case may be. See, you have to realize that when you talk about this, it's not always about a situation where you're selling or buying something. We could be adding someone to the deed or taking someone off. We could be changing the type of ownership.
It's funny you say that, because my buddy's grandparents, like from both sides, they actually got together and they bought a house in both of them. We go over and say what's up every once in a while.
Now, what you want to do is, you go to the property appraisers, find that property on the property appraiser. Then you want to, in the property appraisers, a place where they show the sales. You find, the last one would be the one where they bought it. And there's a place where you can go to the book and page where the deed is. And that way you can see which one of these they set up. Or they may have done a trust, I don't know.
So for me to find out if my husband, we have, are you lying? You lying? That's my question. Where would I go for me to find that out, to see if it's public?
Property appraiser. And when you get to the property appraiser, you click on the little magnifying glass that takes you to the clerk of the court where your deed will magically appear, or somebody else's.
The way it says underneath, the right of survivorship.
Right of owners, not heirs. Yes.
No, you just go on Papa,
Okay.
property appraisers website, and search property by address or last name. It's advisable that you use an attorney to properly clarify. I don't know myself, but when it's assumed my law, do what you do, then I get another license. It's advisable that you use an attorney. And that you're not aware of.
If I wanted to give you a life estate for your life, how would I have to own it?
Sold as a savings security.
I'm not gonna say,
I would have to own it in fee simple. Because if I didn't own it in fee simple, I could only give you my life. So if I have a life estate, I can't give you a life estate for your life. I can only give you a life estate for my life. Now, if I name someone to receive it upon the life estate holder's death, they are called remaindermen. Remainder man.
Or vested remainder.
And they don't necessarily mean you have to be married. Remainder person.
Or woman.
But
Now, woman is discriminatory. Reverse. Stand up for my rights.
You're outnumbered.
What happens if I give you a life estate for you, your life, I die and you die?
Goes to your heirs.
No?
Absolutely, she's absolutely correct.
That's
Because she had a life estate, so when she's dead, so are her rights. I had fee simple.
yeah.
I'm not dead.
Oh, yeah, that is.
I'm not legally dead. I'm physically dead. But as far as my estate is still alive.
Yeah.
So that's the evil stepmother clause.
Yeah, pretty much.
We are contingents, the beneficiaries.
So here's what they do in the 55 plus communities. Let's say that I am 55 plus. Let's say I bought a place in Central Village. Estate in 70, so I own it in fee simple. I want to make sure that when I die, that my daughter gets property. So I could create a life estate and name her as the remainderman. So if I die, it goes to her. Yes.
If you're own something in fee simple and you're married and you die and your spouse, doesn't she in the state of Florida get the rights to stay in that house until she dies?
And it's only before the marriage.
Now, it depends on whether it's a homestead or not. And that's not quite the way it works, but we're gonna talk about that in a couple pages.
Okay.
So we go into detail. Yeah, because the homestead rights here are very different than they are in other places.
Distribution.
Then what the heck does this mean? Estate and reversion. Estate in reversion, what's that mean? It means that if the life estate doesn't have anybody named to receive it upon the death of the life estate holder, it reverts back to the fee simple owner. Or the fee simple estate, because the fee simple owner may not be alive anymore.
Okay, what if the fee simple estate is not alive anymore? What if the fee simple estate is not alive anymore?
The estate will be alive, the person may not be.
Okay, so now what? So what happens to the estate?
Depends.
Depends on how the estate
The worst that can happen is that it winds up in the hands of the state of Florida.
probate.
Because there's nobody in that person's tree to claim rights to it.
But who can claim rights to it?
Your family.
The family.
Anybody like?
You have to go to probate.
The ones that
Yeah, you go to probate.
That's gonna be a fiasco.
Well, see, the minute I realize that's what's happening on a listing I'm about to take, I'm gonna send them to their friendly attorney, because we got an estate issue here that needs to be worked out before we worry about selling the thing. See, you're learning things to tell you red flags. That's what this is really about. You know enough about it to say, there's something's not right here. Now we ship it over to the title company and have them interpret it for us. See, I told you, you're gonna become a genius just like me. As soon as you figure out who knows what you need to know.
Where to
Because there's a lot of shit as an agent you need to know. And there's no way you can keep track of all of it. That's why resources and little black books with people's names. Wrong one. You know what I'm gonna do?
You throw it away.
I'm gonna throw it away because I know.
You get a drink.
Oh, I think that. Drink it. All right, let's take a look at the leasehold.
Can we start writing some?
No.
Huh?
No. How many of you are leasing an apartment or a house?
I am right now.
Which one of those leaseholds do you have?
I will.
So you don't have an expiration date?
Number one.
Yeah, that first one. Alright.
How many of you have ever stayed over after the lease period was through with the landlord's permission?
Yeah, you do the month to month.
If you ever did, that's called a tenancy at will, which can be terminated at the will of either party with proper notice. When we get to the book, I'll show you what the proper notice is.
Also, I'm at will, because I can go until I want.
So you have a written lease?
Yeah,
Does it have an expiration date?
no. No, because I actually can leave before or after.
Before or after what?
One date, but it has a lot of disclosure about that if I wanna back end before it's expired.
So your lease doesn't have an ending date?
No, it depends on.
In other words, if you just kept paying, it would keep going. It doesn't expire.
Yeah, if I wanna stay, I can continue, as long as I pay what they tell me to pay, and if I agree.
See, because a tenancy will. Notice I didn't put whether it was in writing or verbal. Could be either. The thing that makes them different is the expiration date. Which one of those three would represent a situation where the tenant was there without the right to be there?
The first one, state no.
No, probably the one that says sufferance. Anybody who's been a landlord knows what tenancy and sufferance means. It means that sucker's not laying dead, tearing the place up.
What does it mean?
Say again?
I didn't know what you said.
What's the what mean?
What is tenancy of suffering?
Means the landlord is suffering because the tenant
Isn't paying.
is not paying, is tearing the place up, or the lease has expired and they won't get out. So, see, I see the word sufferance.
So no one.
Sufferance doesn't sound like something good.
So if no one enters into that, no landlord will enter into that on purpose.
No. They will enter into the top two.
Yeah.
Okay. So you would agree that a tenancy for years is for a definite period of time.
Right.
Because if it has an expiration date, it's a definite period of time.
Right.
Which one of these, well, let me ask this question. Is a life estate for a definite period of time?
Yes.
Yes.
For the life of the owner.
For your life, however long you live.
So is your answer yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
So let me ask a question. If you gave me a life estate, are you also going to indicate on that piece of paper when I'm going to die?
No.
That would be
Very intrusive.
Unless they say with 10 years.
Is a life estate for a definite period of time?
No.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
It would have to be on it, to be for a definite period of time, it has to have an expiration date. And if you know what day I'm gonna die, I think the sheriff's department might want to talk to you. Especially given present circumstances. So if the question starts out, you have a instrument that is for a definite period of time, there's only one answer to that question.
That's very convenient.
Is the estate for years?
Good one, Nancy.
Because this definitely does not have
No, nothing.
an expiration date, which means nothing underneath of it does. We don't know when a person's gonna die. Statistically, we know they are, but
We don't know when.
We don't know when.
when? We know when your estate for years is gonna end. December the 31st, 2019, that's the end of your lease. So we know when that estate for years is gonna die. But it's the only one that we know for sure. Yes.
Oh, God. Can execute.
But it all boils down to two things. You either own it or you lease it. How you own it or how you lease it, well, there. I'm gonna show you a life estate next time. I don't really have time to do it now. Next time, I'll show you a life estate that's a little more involved than this life estate. So let me ask you a question. You're about to take a listing. You see that the owner has given themselves a life estate. Because you'll see the owner as the grantor and the grantee. and you'll see that the grantee now has a life estate. So you know that whoever, and you see the same person as the grantor and grantee, you know they've set up a life estate. The next thing I'm looking for is what? Are there any remainder? That will be on that deed. It probably will be
Children.
children, more often than not.
And they would have to sign.
Now, my question to you is this. Let's assume Dad set up the life estate and named his two kids as remainder. Dad decides he wants to sell the place. Are we gonna have to include those two kids on the listing agreement?
Yes,
Yes.
unless it's an early bird.
Yes or no?
No.
No,
No.
unless.
No,
No.
no.
Why?
Because it's not there.
Yeah, it's just in case he dies that happens.
Because he doesn't have the right to sell fee simple anymore. He gave himself a life estate. So the only way they can sell you a fee simple estate is if the kids are a part of this deal. So if the kids don't want to sell, mom ain't selling. Because how many of you would buy a life estate from mom who is 83 with a bad heart and diabetes off the chart? And she likes bicycling on the middle of A1A. But don't laugh, people. That's the scenarios I see all the time in these 55-plus communities. Constantly. And then I've got an even more involved version. To show you, like I said, to show you next time. But the point I'm trying to make with some of these illustrations, some of the stuff I'm telling you is not gonna be on test. But you're gonna have to deal with it in real life. And it's gonna affect every transaction you do. Because whether you've got the buyer or the seller, you gotta figure out, do I have the right person? Especially when you're taking a listing. I've got to make sure I've got the right people sitting in front of me.
How do you do that?
Right off the bat, look at the deed.
What happens if you're not so good at that
And you're not so good at that, well, let's see.
You title company house?
Yes, and so do I. And so does Gail.
So,
Yeah.
the answer to the question is, you need to include them in the
Yeah.
sales agreement. Okay.
Right. Because a life estate holder can only sell what they're holding. This person's holding fee simple, right, selling anything. But remember, this is not a fee simple, but all these others are.
When you set up that life estate, you have to pick one of those two things, or?
Well, if you set it up with your kid's name to receive it upon your death, they're a remainder.
What happens if you don't put your kids?
If you put nothing, then it becomes an estate and settlement by law. Which means it goes back to the fee simple. And I say estate because it doesn't mean that the fee simple owner has to be alive. It just gets more complicated.
Yeah,
Because then probate's gonna come into play.
But then,
Or you could,
my own life person, with my guy, that shit, not the house, he's there, but he's working on it. And in the house, but
it's the position attached to the early bird notice.
okay, but let's say that it was here, so now what? That's it, and it's a
It was just your father and mother on the deed? Assuming that we have estate by the entirety. They left no will? Didn't do no probate. So you better get yourself an attorney. You're gonna need one. Depending on how well you get along with your siblings. Yeah, well, it would be, it would still be simple to me. But see, the owner of a trust is not the trust. The owner of the trust is the trustee. When you look at the deed, where they show the current owner, which is the grantee, it'll say John Smith, trustee of the Smith Trust.
Yes.
And that's the exact wording that you put on your listing agreement.
Yes, but sometimes.
Then we have to make sure that John Smith has the authority to sign. Well, that's where the trust itself comes into play. So now we ask for a copy of the trust, which we probably can go over to our title company and let them look at it and tell us what they're gonna do, or what we need to do, or what documentation we need.
But the owner of the trust is the grantee.
I'm sorry?
The owner of the trust
Is the grantee. The current owner of the property is always the grantee. Yeah.
It's not the grand, it's not does that usually cost a lot of money?
It depends. I don't know how involved it's gonna get. And you have to be careful doing it with yourself, because you screw up doing the wrong thing, you could have more problems.
I would like to ask you a peaceful question. What if you have a lease agreement? How do you, let's say that you build something, land, what if you need to, what about the also that determination that you even know it? You can't have that unnoticed because you're investing a lot of money, whatever you put on that land.
Then you're not leasing. You're putting your money into it, and it's a lease?
Yes.
You're leasing the land?
Let's say the McDonald's business, where the McDonald's owners bought the land and they rented it to the other guys.
Plus those are commercial leases.
Yeah, no, I know. So it's not the same concept.
I have a question. If you buy the house, like a free sample of the state.
Okay.
And after.
Wait a minute, is it just you?
Just me.
Okay.
And after like 10 years, I decide to marry.
Why would you do that?
So, what happened with the house? When the house was mine for the 10 years, what happened after? If I'm gonna have a husband?
Oh, you're gonna be here?
Yes.
That's a yes or a
Just
no?
say yes. Just say yes.
And then still your house?
It's my house, so he don't have nothing to do.
No.
Even if you are married.
No?
Now,
You could sign a quitclaim deed and add him onto the title.
No, why would you?
That's right.
What happens if I die and I have a daughter? This automatically
Yeah,
the
but
house.
no.
No?
You better make sure you make provisions. You might want, if you may want to set up a life estate and name her as a arrangement.
Okay. Even if I'm.
And here's what I do when I have situations. Because I had a situation where it was a husband and a wife and her father. Listen. And her father. They all three wanted to buy it. So they were protected because he was 70-some and sick and, you know the routine. And for whatever reason, they were going for financing, and for whatever reason, they didn't want the husband and wife on it. So we wound up selling it to him as an estate settlement. He was the sole owner. Now, that means probate if he would die. So I called the title company, and this was even before closing, and she said, okay, tell you what we'll do, but we have to wait until the deed's recorded. So they are the official owners of the property. They set up a life estate. Dad gave himself a life estate and named the daughter and the husband as remainder. Now, which estate would they put the two of them under?
Life
No. No. Yeah, under remainderment. Which one of these?
Oh. The right of survivorship. Another joint.
So that if something happened to one of them, it would automatically go to, yeah. That, all the one I just described had nothing to do with buying the property. It had to do with setting up the estate. So, see, you gotta get out of your head that this is not just about buying or selling a piece of property. A lot of it, especially in a place like this, a lot of it is setting up estates. And has nothing to do with buying or selling. Yes.
But bear in mind that if the people involved are young enough and might need a refinance or do something, the banks reserve the right not to accept the life estate. They may actually revert it to a fee simple title in order to refinance the mortgage.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff we're talking about now really is not necessarily to the benefit of the younger crowd. It says rights of owners, not heirs. It means, the survivorship means it doesn't go to the heirs, it goes to the other owners. Okay. Thanks, guys. Best thing to do is take a
All right, see you Wednesday.
Bye, Dan, thank you.
No, it's not over. I find it fast. Yeah. Yeah.
Then includes errands. No, c'est facile.
No, I'm not. I'm here. Well, what are you doing? Okay.
See you on Wednesday.